April 30th, 1943. A fishing boat off the coast of Spain pulls something from the water. It's a body, a British Royal Marine officer floating face down, a briefcase chained to his wrist. Inside that briefcase, top-secret documents revealing the Allied invasion plans for Europe. Within hours, these documents would reach Nazi Germany's highest command. Hitler himself would read them, and he would make a decision that would change the course of World War II. There was just one problem. The body was a lie. The officer never existed. And British intelligence had just pulled off the most audacious deception in military history. This is the story of Operation Mincemeat, the bizarre, brilliant plot that involved a dead homeless man, a fake love story, and theater tickets to a show he'd never see. And it might have saved D-Day. Before we dive into one of WWE's strangest operations, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. This channel brings you the untold stories of history that changed everything. And trust me, you won't believe where this one goes. Now let's talk about the man who never was. Chapter 1. The Impossible Problem. By early 1943, the Allies faced a deadly puzzle. After years of brutal fighting, they were finally ready to strike back at Nazi-occupied Europe. But where? The Mediterranean was the obvious target. Sicily was the logical stepping stone. Close enough to bomb from North Africa, weak enough to invade, strategic enough to knock Italy out of the war entirely. There was just one massive problem. It was too obvious. German intelligence knew it. Hitler knew it. If the Allies invaded Sicily, they'd be walking into a fortress. The Germans could reinforce the island, position their panzer divisions, and turn the beaches into a killing field. Thousands of Allied soldiers would die in the surf before they ever reached dry land. The Allied command needed the Germans looking somewhere else. Anywhere else. Greece, maybe. Sardinia. Even the south of France. They needed the Nazis to spread their defenses thin, to second-guess themselves, to hesitate. But how do you fool the most paranoid military intelligence apparatus in the world? Enter Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montague and Flight Lieutenant Charles Cholmondeley, two officers working for British intelligence's deception unit. Their job was to dream up impossible schemes. And in January 1943, Cholmondeley pitched an idea so insane it just might work. What if, he suggested, we float a dead body into enemy territory carrying fake invasion plans? The concept wasn't entirely new. British intelligence had used deception before. Double agents, fake radio traffic, inflatable tanks. But this was different. This required making the Germans believe something so completely that they'd reposition entire armies based on lies found on a corpse. Montague loved it. But the idea was useless without execution. And execution required answering 100 impossible questions. Where do you get a body? How do you make it look like it drowned? How do you create a fake identity convincing enough to fool Nazi intelligence officers? How do you guarantee the body washes up in exactly the right place? And most importantly, how do you make the Germans believe it? They started with the body itself. It couldn't be just anyone. British pathologists explained that a drowned person looks very specific. Fluid in the lungs, specific discoloration, telltale signs. But here's the thing. If a body has been in the water long enough, those signs disappear. Decomposition becomes the great equalizer. They needed someone who died from something that could mimic drowning after decomposition. And they needed someone nobody would miss. Through a quiet network of contacts and absolute secrecy, they found their man. His name was Glyndwr Michael, a 34-year-old homeless Welshman who had died from eating rat poison laced with phosphorus. Desperate, poor, forgotten by society, he died alone in a London warehouse on January 28, 1943. His body was perfect. Phosphorus poisoning causes fluid in the lungs, which could pass for drowning after time in the water. More importantly, he had no family searching for him, no records that would raise questions. Glyndwr Michael was about to become the most important man in the war effort. He just wouldn't know it. The team stored his body in a secret morgue, kept at careful temperatures. They couldn't freeze him. That would be obvious under examination. But they couldn't let him decompose too much either. He needed to look like a man who'd been in the water for days, not weeks. While the body waited, Montague and Cholmondeley began the most elaborate identity theft in history. Their corpse needed a name, a rank, a life story. He needed to be important enough to carry top-secret documents, but not so important that his face would be recognizable. They created Captain, acting Major, William Martin of the Royal Marines. Not a real person, but real enough. They gave him identity papers, military orders, a photograph. They even gave him a personality. But documents weren't enough. Nazi intelligence was good, terrifyingly good. They'd examine every detail. So Montague's team went further. They gave Major Martin a life. They crafted personal letters from a father figure, chatty, warm, mentioning family matters. They included a stern letter from his bank about an overdraft of $79, a perfect detail since a fake document would never include something embarrassing. They added theater ticket stubs from London's West End because a man traveling on military business might have caught a show before leaving. And then they gave him a fiancée. Her name was Pam. She existed only in 2 photographs and a letter, but that letter, written by a female MI5 officer, was a masterpiece. It was breathless, romantic, slightly overeager. She wrote about their engagement, about wedding plans, about how she couldn't wait for him to return. She even included a joke about her family. The letter was perfect because it was imperfect, slightly awkward, deeply personal, exactly what a real love letter looks like. Any intelligence officer reading it would feel like they were invading someone's privacy. That was the point. They stuffed his pockets with the mundane debris of life, keys, a pencil stub, a receipt for a shirt, loose change. They put a religious medal around his neck. They even placed a bill from his tailor, unpaid naturally. And then came the masterstroke, the documents. Chapter 2, The Perfect Lie. The documents had to be believable enough to fool Hitler himself. And they had to be discovered in exactly the right way, not so easily that it seemed like a plant, but not so secretly that they'd be missed. The solution was elegant. A briefcase, chained to Major Martin's wrist. Inside, they placed 2 letters. Not detailed invasion plans. That would be too convenient, too suspicious. No. These were casual correspondence between high-ranking officers, the kind of documents that would be carried by a courier between commands. The first letter was from Lieutenant General Archibald Nye, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, addressed to General Harold Alexander, commander of British forces in North Africa. It discussed operations and mentioned, almost in passing, that the Allies were planning to invade Greece and Sardinia, with Sicily as a decoy target to draw German attention away. The second letter was from Lord Louis Mountbatten, Chief of Combined Operations, to Admiral Andrew Cunningham in North Africa. It introduced Major Martin as a specialist in combined operations and an expert in landing craft, explaining why such sensitive documents would be traveling with a relatively junior officer. Both letters were masterfully written. They didn't scream, "Secret invasion plans here." They were bureaucratic, casual, even boring in places. They included inside jokes, personal asides, and references to other operations. They read like what they were supposed to be, real correspondence between officers who knew each other well. To make absolutely sure the Germans would take the bait, they added one more critical detail to Mountbatten's letter, an apology for sending Martin by air instead of by safer means, with a quip about how the documents were too important to risk by surface mail. The implication was clear. These papers were so sensitive that they required a special courier, but the urgency was so great that they'd risked air travel anyway. When the plane crashed and Martin drowned, it would all make perfect sense. Now they had their body, their identity, and their documents. But they still had one massive problem. How do you guarantee a corpse washes up in exactly the right place? They needed somewhere controlled by a neutral country. Spain was perfect. Officially neutral but riddled with German spies, Spanish authorities would definitely pass anything they found to Nazi intelligence. But Spain has a long coastline. Where exactly should Major Martin appear? The team studied tides, currents, weather patterns. They needed somewhere the body would wash ashore quickly before decomposition made the deception obvious. They needed somewhere near a German intelligence network, but not so close to Gibraltar that it seemed suspicious. They chose Huelva, a small port in southwestern Spain. The local Spanish intelligence officer there, the British knew, was actively working with the Germans. Perfect. On April 19, 1943, Major William Martin's body was placed in a special canister filled with dry ice. The canister was loaded aboard HMS Seraph, a submarine commanded by Lieutenant Bill Jewell. Only Jewell and his first officer knew what they were really carrying. The Seraph slipped out of Holy Loch in Scotland, headed south. For 10 days, she traveled submerged through U-boat-infested waters, her crew believing they were on a routine secret mission. They had no idea they were carrying the most important corpse in military history. On April 30th, just before dawn, HMS Seraph surfaced off the coast of Huelva. Lieutenant Jewell ordered everyone below deck except for his first officer and 2 ratings sworn to secrecy. They opened the canister. Major Martin had survived the journey remarkably well, all things considered. They dressed him in his Royal Marine uniform, attached the briefcase with its chain, checked his pockets one final time. Everything had to be perfect. Then came a moment that sounds absurd but was deadly serious. They put a Mae West life jacket on him. Why? Because a man falling from an aircraft into the ocean would be wearing one. Every detail mattered. At 4:30 a.m., they read a brief prayer over the body. Then they slid Major William Martin into the Mediterranean Sea and watched him float away toward Spain. The current was perfect. Within hours, Spanish fishermen spotted the body and hauled it ashore. The local authorities were notified. The briefcase was noticed immediately, and the trap was set. The British had one more trick up their sleeve. As soon as the body was discovered, the British naval attaché in Spain began making a fuss, urgently requesting the return of the briefcase, insisting the documents were classified, demanding to know if the seals had been broken. It was psychological warfare. The more desperate the British seemed to get those documents back, the more valuable the Spanish and the Germans would think they were. Human nature. We want what others desperately want to keep from us. The Spanish authorities played along perfectly. They expressed sympathy, promised to return everything, and immediately photographed every single document before handing them back. Within days, those photographs were in German hands. Within a week, they were on Hitler's desk, and Hitler believed every word. Chapter 3. The Nazis take the bait. When the photographs reached Berlin, German intelligence went to work with their characteristic thoroughness. The Abwehr, Nazi military intelligence, had some of the best analysts in the world. If there was anything suspicious about Major Martin or his documents, they would find it. They checked everything. They verified that the serial numbers on his identity papers matched British military protocols. They analyzed the paper, the typewriters used, the signatures. They contacted their agents in London to see if anyone matching Martin's description existed in military records. They even checked the theater ticket stubs. The show he'd allegedly attended, it was actually playing in London on those dates. The bank overdraft? They confirmed that the bank existed and used similar letterhead. Even the receipt from his tailor checked out. That shop was a real establishment near the Royal Marine offices. One Abwehr officer did raise concerns. He noted that the entire thing seemed almost too convenient, a body washing up with perfect documentation about invasion plans. But his superiors overruled him. The documents looked authentic. The personal effects were too detailed to fake. And most importantly, the British were frantically trying to get everything back, which suggested genuine panic. The analysis came back. Genuine. The Abwehr reported to the German High Command that they had obtained authentic Allied invasion plans. The target was Greece and Sardinia. Sicily was a feint. Hitler was ecstatic. This was exactly the kind of intelligence coup he'd been hoping for. He immediately ordered the reinforcement of Greece and Sardinia. Panzer divisions were redirected. Coastal defenses were strengthened. The Luftwaffe repositioned squadrons. Most critically, Hitler reduced the German presence in Sicily. Why waste resources defending an island the Allies were only pretending to target? Field Marshal Erwin Rommel was dispatched to Greece to oversee its defense. Additional troops were sent to Sardinia and Corsica. The Germans even reinforced the south of France just in case. The Nazi war machine pivoted based on lies carried by a corpse. But the British didn't know any of this yet. They'd successfully planted the body, but did the Germans actually believe it? The deception would only work if the Nazis acted on the false information. The breakthrough came through Ultra, the British code-breaking operation that had cracked the German Enigma machines. Intercepted messages began showing German troop movements exactly where they'd hoped. Reinforcements to Greece, new deployments to Sardinia, reduced presence in Sicily. On May 14th, a decoded German message included the phrase, "The Führer does not agree with the douche that the most likely invasion point is Sicily." That single sentence told British intelligence everything they needed to know. Hitler had swallowed the bait completely. Churchill was informed. Eisenhower was informed. The message went out to commanders. Operation Mincemeat was a success. Sicily's defenses would be weaker than expected. The invasion could proceed, but they still had to maintain the deception. If the Germans suspected they'd been fooled, they'd rush forces back to Sicily before the invasion. So the British kept up appearances. They held a proper funeral for Major Martin in Spain, with full military honors. The British naval attaché sent grateful letters to Spanish authorities, praising their handling of the tragic accident. They even ensured that Major Martin's death was reported in British newspapers, just the kind of routine casualty notice that appeared every day during the war. Meanwhile, British intelligence fed misinformation through their double agents, confirming that yes, the invasion plans had unfortunately been compromised when that courier died in a plane crash. But the operations would proceed anyway, because they couldn't be changed at this late stage. The Germans, hearing this through their spy networks, became even more convinced. Of course, the British would proceed with Greece and Sardinia. They'd already committed too many resources to change plans now. Hitler kept German forces spread thin across the Mediterranean, waiting for an invasion that would never come. Sicily remained underdefended. On July 9, 1943, Operation Husky began. Allied forces stormed the beaches of Sicily in one of the largest amphibious assaults of the war. They expected fierce resistance. Sicily was still defended by Italian and German troops, but the defenses were manageable. The Germans had been caught off guard. Their forces positioned for invasions elsewhere. While the battle for Sicily was still brutal, lasting 38 days and costing thousands of lives, it could have been far worse. Military historians later estimated that Operation Mincemeat may have saved tens of thousands of Allied lives by drawing German forces away from Sicily. The successful invasion knocked Italy out of the war by September and opened up the entire Mediterranean to Allied control. But here's the truly remarkable thing. Even after Sicily fell, the Germans didn't realize they'd been tricked. German intelligence conducted an after-action review, trying to understand how they'd been fooled about the invasion target. Their conclusion: the Allies must have changed their plans at the last minute. Major Martin's documents had been genuine. The British simply called an audible. Hitler himself never learned that he'd been deceived by a corpse. The success of Operation Mincemeat remained one of the war's best-kept secrets, known only to a handful of people on the Allied side. Even within British intelligence, most people didn't know the truth. The operation was so secret that the officers who planned it were forbidden from discussing it for decades after the war ended. But the impact of Operation Mincemeat didn't end with Sicily. Its success would inspire an even larger deception, one that would be crucial to D-Day itself. Chapter 4. The Blueprint for D-Day. The success of Operation Mincemeat taught British intelligence something crucial. Elaborate deceptions could work against even the most sophisticated enemy intelligence services. But more than that, it taught them exactly how to do it. The key wasn't just creating fake documents, it was creating a complete fiction so detailed, so layered, that every examination made it seem more real. The personal effects, the love letter, the bank overdraft, these mundane details sold the lie better than any top-secret document could. This philosophy would become the foundation for Operation Fortitude, the massive deception operation designed to protect the D-Day landings in Normandy. By 1944, everyone knew the Allies were planning to invade France. The question wasn't if, but where and when. The Germans expected the invasion to come at the Pas de Calais. the narrowest point of the English Channel, the most logical target. Hitler positioned his strongest forces there, including the 15th Army. But the Allies were planning to land in Normandy, 150 miles to the west. It was a longer crossing, more exposed, riskier, which was exactly why the Germans wouldn't expect it. But only if they could be convinced that Pas de Calais was still the real target. Enter Operation Fortitude, which borrowed heavily from the Mincemeat playbook. But instead of deceiving the Germans with one fake officer, Fortitude would deceive them with an entire fake army. The 1st United States Army Group, FUSAG, was supposedly a massive force of over 1 million men stationed in southeast England, perfectly positioned to strike at Pas de Calais. It had divisions, tank battalions, air support, logistics chains, command headquarters. It had everything a real invasion force would need, except it didn't exist. FUSAG was a ghost army, created through the same attention to detail that had made Major Martin believable. The deception was multi-layered and brilliant. First, the physical deception. The British created fake military installations across southeast England. Inflatable tanks and aircraft that looked real from the air. Fake landing craft made of canvas and wood. Dummy radio equipment. They even built fake oil storage facilities and headquarters buildings. The Germans' reconnaissance planes photographed these installations constantly. Every photo confirmed what German intelligence expected to see: a massive buildup of forces across from Pas de Calais. Second, the radio deception. British operators transmitted fake military communications, movement orders, supply requests, casualty reports, even personal messages between officers. The Germans intercepted these signals, and their intelligence analysts plotted the positions of entire fake divisions based on radio traffic. The traffic was carefully scripted to seem authentic. They included complaints about equipment, jokes between operators, even disciplinary issues. Real military radio traffic is messy and human, so the fake traffic had to be messy and human too. Third, the double agents. Britain had captured and turned nearly every German spy in England through the double-cross system. These agents sent reports back to Germany about the massive army gathering in southeast England. Since the Germans trusted these spies, every report reinforced the deception. And fourth, this was the mincemeat influence, they gave FUSAG a commander whose personality sold the entire operation, General George S. Patton. Patton was one of America's most aggressive and successful generals, famous for his armored warfare tactics. He was exactly the kind of commander who would lead an invasion at Pas de Calais, the shortest route to Paris, perfect for his tank divisions. The British encouraged Patton to make public appearances in southeast England. They leaked information about his command of FUSAG through diplomatic channels where German spies would hear it. They even had him attend a fake ceremony that they knew German reconnaissance would photograph. Patton himself, ego and all, was the human detail that made FUSAG believable, just like Major Martin's love letter made him believable. The deception was so thorough that German intelligence built an entire fictional order of battle based on FUSAG's fake divisions. They tracked units that didn't exist, monitored commanders who were fictitious, and estimated force strength that was pure fantasy. Hitler became so convinced that Pas de Calais was the target that even after D-Day began in Normandy on June 6, 1944, he refused to send reinforcements south. He was certain Normandy was a feint. The real invasion would come at Pas de Calais. For 7 crucial weeks after D-Day, Hitler kept the powerful 15th Army at Pas de Calais, waiting for FUSAG's invasion that would never come. By the time the Germans realized they'd been fooled, the Allies had secured the Normandy beachhead and were breaking out into France. The lessons from Operation Mincemeat, attention to detail, layered deception, human touches that sell the lie, had been scaled up to protect the largest amphibious invasion in history. Military historians credit Operation Fortitude with being one of the most successful strategic deceptions ever executed. It saved countless Allied lives by keeping German reinforcements away from Normandy during the most vulnerable period of the invasion. And it all traced back to the principle proven by a corpse floating off the Spanish coast: if you're going to lie, lie completely. Make every detail perfect, because your enemy will check everything. But there's something deeply strange about the success of these operations. They worked not because the Allies were brilliantly clever, though they were, but because the Germans were rationally logical. Nazi intelligence examined the evidence scientifically. They checked documents, verified details, analyzed patterns. They did everything right. And that's precisely why they were fooled. They never considered that their enemy might commit to a lie so completely that every verification would confirm it. The deception operations of W2 represented a new kind of warfare, information warfare, where truth itself became a weapon. And a homeless Welshman who died alone in a London warehouse became an unlikely hero who helped win the war. But his real name wasn't even on his gravestone. Chapter 5. The Man Who Never Was. In the small Spanish town of Huelva, there's a grave marked with the name Major William Martin, R.M. For decades after the war, locals tended this grave, honoring the British officer who died in service of his country. They had no idea that William Martin never existed. The man in that grave was Glyndwr Michael, and his story is perhaps the saddest part of Operation Mincemeat. Glyndwr Michael was born in Aberbargad, Wales in 1909. He grew up in poverty, and life never improved. His father was a miner. The work was brutal, and the pay was barely enough to survive. When Glyndwr was old enough, he tried to find work, but jobs were scarce in Depression-era Wales. By the 1930s, he drifted to London, joining thousands of other unemployed men living rough in the city. He had no permanent address, no steady work, no family supporting him. He was one of the invisible poor, the people society sees but doesn't look at. On January 26, 1943, Glyndwr Michael was found unconscious in an abandoned warehouse near King's Cross Station. He'd eaten rat poison. Whether intentionally or by accident, we'll never know. Perhaps he was suicidal. Perhaps he was starving and ate something he found without realizing what it was. He died 2 days later in St. Pancras Hospital, alone, unmourned, officially recorded as just another casualty of poverty. He was 34 years old. No one came to claim his body. He had no known relatives, no friends who inquired about him. As far as official London was concerned, Glyndwr Michael was nobody, which made him perfect for British intelligence's purposes. The team running Operation Mincemeat needed a body, but they also needed plausible deniability. If the operation was ever discovered, they couldn't have it traced back to them using someone identifiable. A homeless man with no family, no connections, no one to ask questions. He was ideal. But there's an ethical dimension here that's deeply uncomfortable. Glyndwr Michael never consented to any of this. He died in poverty and desperation, and then his body was conscripted into military service without his knowledge or permission. After the war, when the Mincemeat team was finally allowed to discuss the operation, this ethical question haunted some of them. Ewan Montague wrote about it carefully, never quite admitting the full circumstances of how they obtained the body. In his 1953 book, The Man Who Was Never There, he implied they'd used someone who had volunteered for one final service to his country. That was a lie. One final deception in an operation built on deceptions. The truth about Glyndwr Michael wouldn't emerge until decades later, when researchers dug through medical records and coroner reports. The question becomes, was it justified? Operation Mincemeat arguably saved thousands of lives. The invasion of Sicily succeeded with fewer casualties than expected. The lessons learned helped protect D-Day. In the brutal mathematics of war, using one dead man's body to save thousands of living soldiers seems logical. But Glyndwr Michael had no choice. He was used because he was powerless, because he was forgotten, because society had already failed him in life and then exploited him in death. There's another troubling aspect. The deception continued, even in honoring him. When the operation finally became public in the 1950s, the government still refused to reveal his real identity. He remained Major Martin in official records. His grave in Spain continued to bear a false name. It wasn't until 1998, more than 50 years after his death, that British authorities finally acknowledged Glyndwr Michael's role in Operation Mincemeat. Even then, they didn't change the gravestone. To this day, tourists visiting Huelva see Major William Martin and never learn about the Welsh homeless man underneath. Some argue this is fitting, that Glyndwr Michael deserved to be remembered as a hero, not as a victim of poverty. By keeping the Major Martin identity, he's honored with military respect he never received in life. Others argue it's one final indignity, that even in death, his real name and real story are buried beneath a convenient fiction, that a man who was invisible in life remains invisible in death. The ethical questions extend beyond just Glyndwr Michael. Operation Mincemeat required extensive deception involving real people who never knew they were part of it. The Spanish fishermen who found the body believed they'd discovered an accident victim. The Spanish authorities thought they were handling a genuine military matter. The German intelligence officers who analyzed the documents believed they were doing their duty to protect their country. Even Nazi commanders positioning troops based on the false intelligence thought they were making sound military decisions. How many people were manipulated? How many false beliefs were planted in how many minds? And at what point does effective deception become something more troubling? The industrial-scale production of false reality. These questions became more relevant as the war continued and deception operations grew more sophisticated. By 1944, the British had entire departments dedicated to fabricating realities: fake armies, fake commanders, fake operations, fake documents, fake agents, fake intelligence. The line between necessary wartime deception and Orwellian manipulation of truth was thin and getting thinner, and nobody had really thought through the implications of building institutional systems designed to make lies indistinguishable from truth. After the war, most of the deception specialists went back to civilian life, but some stayed in intelligence work, taking their expertise into the Cold War. The techniques developed for Operation Mincemeat and Operation Fortitude, layered deception, attention to detail, exploiting human psychology, became standard tools of espionage. The Cold War would be fought partly in shadows, with truth and lies blurred deliberately, and the seeds of that conflict were planted in operations like Mincemeat, where intelligence services learned they could manipulate reality itself. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The immediate legacy of Operation Mincemeat was military and strategic, and even 80 years later, it remains one of the most studied deception operations in history. Chapter 6. The Legacy of Deception. Operation Mincemeat succeeded so brilliantly that it created a problem. It was too good to remain secret forever, but too sensitive to reveal during the war. The people who'd planned it couldn't tell anyone, not even other Allied commanders, exactly what they'd done. Churchill himself knew, of course. He'd approved the operation and received regular updates. After the Sicily invasion succeeded, he reportedly told Montagu and Cholmondeley, "We have had such great success that I cannot help feeling that it is wrong not to let the world know about it." But the security services disagreed strongly. If the Germans learned they'd been fooled by a corpse, they'd be far more skeptical of any intelligence they captured in the future. Worse, they might deduce Britain's intelligence-gathering methods, the turned agents, the code-breaking, the entire apparatus of deception. So Operation Mincemeat remained classified, locked away in files marked "Most Secret." The team involved was forbidden from discussing it, even with their families. Major Martin's grave in Spain gave away nothing. The operation that may have saved thousands of lives couldn't save itself from obscurity. This secrecy lasted until 1950, when the Joint Intelligence Committee finally agreed to partially declassify the operation. Even then, they insisted on certain restrictions. The real identity of the body couldn't be revealed, the specific methods of creating the deception had to remain vague, and the role of ultra-code breaking couldn't be mentioned at all. Ewan Montagu, who'd been one of the operation's architects, was authorized to write a book about it. The Man Who Was Never There was published in 1953 and became an immediate bestseller. For the first time, the public learned about the audacious deception, though Montagu's account carefully obscured certain details. The book revealed the basic operation: a dead body, fake documents, German deception. But it romanticized the story, making it seem like a triumphant adventure while downplaying the ethical complications. Montagu's version implied they'd used a volunteer, or someone who died naturally in a way that happened to suit their needs. The book was adapted into a film in 1956, also called The Man Who Was Never There, which dramatized the story even further. The movie added romantic subplots that never existed and portrayed the operation as a dashing intelligence coup with none of the moral ambiguity. For decades, this sanitized version was the only story the public knew. Glinder Michael's name appeared nowhere. The full circumstances, how they'd obtained the body, how they'd verified the Germans' response through code breaking, how the operation connected to the larger deception network, remained classified. Meanwhile, military institutions around the world studied Operation Mincemeat in secret. The operation became a foundational case study in strategic deception, analyzed in military academies and intelligence training programs. The principles it demonstrated, multi-layered deception, attention to psychological detail, exploitation of enemy expectations, became core doctrine. The influence is visible in military operations to this day. Modern military deception still follows the mincemeat playbook. Create a coherent narrative, support it with verifiable details, exploit the enemy's own intelligence capabilities against them. During the Gulf War in 1991, coalition forces used elaborate deceptions to convince Iraq that the main attack would come from the sea, when actually it was a massive flanking maneuver through the desert. The deception included fake amphibious preparations, misleading radio traffic, and deliberate leaks through channels known to be monitored by Iraqi intelligence, straight out of the mincemeat and fortitude methodology. In the digital age, the same principles apply to cyber warfare. Modern intelligence agencies create elaborate false trails in digital spaces, fake organizations with websites, social media presence, email histories, all designed to deceive adversaries. Its Operation Mincemeat scaled to the internet, with the same attention to detail that made Major Martin's theater ticket stubs believable. But the operation's legacy extends beyond military tactics. Operation Mincemeat represents something larger, the weaponization of narrative itself. The operation succeeded because it told a compelling story. Major Martin wasn't just documents in a briefcase. He was a person with a fiancé, money problems, a life. The Germans believed it because the narrative made sense. Every detail reinforced the story, and the story made the details believable. This principle, that narrative coherence can trump factual accuracy, has troubling implications in our current age of misinformation. The techniques that fooled Nazi intelligence in 1943 can be seen in modern disinformation campaigns where fabricated stories gain traction because they're detailed, emotionally resonant, and confirm existing beliefs. The difference, of course, is intent and context. Operation Mincemeat was wartime deception against an enemy military. Most people would consider that justified. Modern disinformation often targets civilian populations for political manipulation, a very different ethical situation. But the mechanics are similar. Both rely on understanding that humans believe stories more readily than facts, that emotional truth often overwhelms factual truth, and that confirmation bias makes people surprisingly easy to deceive if you tell them what they already want to believe. Perhaps the most important legacy of Operation Mincemeat is this. It proved that institutional systems could be built to manufacture belief on an industrial scale. The British deception apparatus of WPI was astonishingly sophisticated, a bureaucracy dedicated to crafting lies so perfect that every investigation made them seem more true. After the war, intelligence agencies worldwide adopted these methods. The CIA, KGB, MI6, Mossad all developed similar capabilities for what's now called perception management. Creating false realities became a standard tool of statecraft. Today, we live in an information environment where governments, corporations, and other actors routinely employ sophisticated deception techniques. The boundary between truth and strategic fiction has become increasingly blurred. Operation Mincemeat showed that with enough resources, expertise, and attention to detail, reality itself could be fabricated convincingly. That's a powerful capability in wartime, but it's a troubling one in peacetime. Yet for all its strategic brilliance and historical importance, perhaps the most human legacy of Operation Mincemeat is the simplest: Glyndwr. Michael matters. He was a nobody in life, poor, forgotten, anonymous. But in death, he became consequential. His body helped turn the tide of history. Without him, thousands more soldiers might have died on Sicilian beaches. The Mediterranean campaign might have stalled. The war might have lasted longer. In 2003, exactly 60 years after his body washed up on Spanish shores, the British government finally placed a marker on his grave acknowledging his true identity. It reads, Glyndwr Michael, served as Major William Martin, RM. It's a small recognition, but it matters. It acknowledges that beneath the legend of Major Martin was a real person, someone who'd suffered, who'd struggled, whose life had ended in desperation and loneliness, someone who deserved to be remembered by his real name. Some historians have tracked down records of Glyndwr Michael's early life in Wales, trying to piece together who he really was beyond his usefulness to British intelligence. They've found census records, school attendance logs, fragmentary evidence of a life lived in poverty. These researchers argue that remembering Glyndwr Michael, not just Major Martin, is important. It's a reminder that behind every statistic, every casualty, every strategic success, there are real individuals with real lives and real stories. The irony, of course, is that Glyndwr Michael became famous precisely because he was used as a fiction. If the operation had failed, if his identity had never been revealed, he would have remained what he was in life: forgotten. Instead, his name now appears in history books, his story taught in military academies, his sacrifice, involuntary though it was, acknowledged. Is that redemption? Or is it just one more way his powerlessness was exploited, this time for historical narrative rather than military deception? There's no easy answer, but perhaps that's appropriate. Operation Mincemeat was never a simple story of heroism. It was complex, morally ambiguous, brilliant, and troubling in equal measure. It showed humanity at its most clever and most callous, capable of intricate strategic thinking and also capable of using a desperate man's corpse as a tool of war. It saved lives through deception while raising questions about the ethics of manipulation that we still grapple with today. Ewan Montague, who planned the operation, lived until 1985. In his later years, he gave occasional interviews about mincemeat, always carefully, always mindful of what remained classified. When asked if he had any regrets, he would say he was proud of the operation's success and believed it was necessary for victory. But he never quite answered the question about Glyndwr Michael directly, whether it bothered him that they'd used a man who couldn't consent, who'd died in poverty, who'd been nobody in life and became somebody only through deception in death. Charles Cholmondeley, who'd first proposed the operation, was more reflective. In private conversations years later, he reportedly said that the operation's success came at a moral cost he hadn't fully appreciated at the time. War, he said, required doing things you'd never do in peace, and sometimes those necessary things stayed with you long after the fighting stopped. The last surviving member of the mincemeat team, a junior officer who'd helped with logistics, died in 2016. With his death, the living memory of the operation finally ended. Now it exists only in documents, books, films, and the grave in Huelva, where a homeless man lies beneath a false name that became more famous than his real one ever was. Operation Mincemeat remains one of the most successful deception operations in military history. It's studied, admired, and sometimes celebrated as a triumph of intelligence work. And it was strategically brilliant, meticulously executed, historically consequential. But it's also a reminder that war transforms everything it touches, including truth itself. That sometimes victory requires deception so complete that even in peace, the lies persist. That the difference between a hero and a victim can be nothing more than which name appears on a gravestone. Glyndwr Michael died alone in a London hospital, a casualty of poverty and despair. Major William Martin died a hero, saving thousands of lives. They were the same person. They were completely different people. Both statements are true. That paradox, that tension between truth and necessary fiction, might be Operation Mincemeat's most lasting legacy. In a world where information warfare has become routine, where deception operations are standard tools of statecraft, where reality itself can be manufactured convincingly enough to fool even sophisticated analysis, we're all living in the world that Operation Mincemeat helped create. The corpse that changed D-Day was also a man named Glyndwr Michael. Remember both. Because the moment we forget the real human being beneath the strategic deception is the moment we've been deceived most completely of all. The story of Operation Mincemeat is incredible. A homeless man became a fake officer who fooled Hitler and helped win World War II. But what makes it truly fascinating is everything it reveals about deception, warfare, and the price of victory. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most audacious operations, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We've got more untold stories from World War II coming up, including the double agents who fed Germany false information for years, and the massive fake army that protected D-Day. Hit that like button if you learned something new today, and drop a comment telling me, do you think using Glyndor Michael's body was justified? It's a genuinely tough ethical question, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.